everybody, and thank you to our panel. This is, we're celebrating and honoring International Women's Day with an interfaith panel conversation that is sponsored by the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County. My name is Terri Moss. I'm a vice chair on the Interfaith Council, and just very honored to be here amongst all of you as we honor women. And most specifically, we're going to hear from our panel today, on how your faith tradition allows for you to present or enable equality of women in various aspects of your lives. I'm just going to state your names and then ask that each of you in your comments to start off by saying where you're from or your background, your faith tradition. And then each of you will spend 9 or 10 minutes talking about that topic and inspiring and helping all of us. I know I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. So starting from the person closest to us, the woman closest to us, this is Reverend Johanna Wagner, with who is a pastor at this church, the First Presbyterian Church of Concord. Next to her is Kate Boisvert, thank you, from Sufism Reoriented. And next to Kate, is Eartha Newsong from the Orinda Community Church. And next to Eartha is Bushra Gill, who is a Muslim woman who is involved in many women's circles and in our interfaith community. And next to Bushra is Courtney Cummings, a Native American woman. So with that, I will turn it over to Reverend Johanna Wagner. I'll just say one other thing, that when they are all done presenting, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. I believe that you have index cards, and feel free to write your question on the index cards, and you can bring them up here, or we will collect them at the end of the presentation. So thank you.
So it seems really appropriate that we would have the Girl Scouts meeting right next to us while this is going on.
Yeah, very appropriate.
So, if you're wondering what that is and what's going on there, that's what's going on. So I guess because I'm a Protestant pastor, a Presbyterian pastor, I'm gonna approach this from a very scriptural point of view, since that's my training, and just talk a little bit about what I see as strengths and weaknesses of the tradition when it comes to women. I think the first point that I would make is that scripture is, I don't want to say essentially misogynistic, but it's pretty close to that. When you sort of give it a cursory look through, you're going to find a lot of pretty serious issues in its treatment of women. For example, just starting at the beginning, you've got the Adam and Eve story, where Eve is really seen as causing this sort of fundamental downfall of the human species. In the prophets, you have lots of images of sort of God as the jealous husband and Israel as the cheating spouse. You have some very disturbing images of Israel as it's sort of defeated. Where you'll see images of Israel as, having her skirts pulled over her head, which is sort of suggestive almost of kind of not just sort of the exposing of her private parts to humiliate her, but even potentially sort of a kind of a rape image. Turning to the New Testament, you've got, well, disciples are all men, and you have Jesus' closest disciples, the people that are closest to him, his closest friends. Peter, James, and John, again, all men. So there's a lot in Scripture that I would say is not necessarily on the surface supportive of women. So what I tell other women and what I've learned for myself is that you have to be able to look at Scripture and to watch for what I call its telling departures. So these moments when the sort of official story of Israel as cheating spouse, or women as downfall of all humanity, when those themes and motifs and sort of go by the wayside, and all of a sudden you see kind of another voice emerge. And I give you some examples of what I'm talking about. For example, in the Old Testament, you'll have these heroines like Deborah, for example, or Jael or Huldah, the prophet, who, when King Josiah they discovered a book in the temple, my God, and they want to know if it's authentic. They take it to this woman prophet named Huldah, and she's seen as sort of the expert, I guess you could say. You've got a character like Ruth, who really is not only a woman, but a foreign woman, who proves to be a kind of a God figure, a person who's able to give life back to a woman who's bereaved, and who then is, at the end of the book, is mentioned as one of David's ancestors. So you have moments like that in the Old Testament, where you have women who are playing roles that run very counter to what might be described as sort of the official scriptural position on women. And then I think there's how you see Jesus and women relating to Jesus' ministry, and I think there's many interesting things there that women can kind of draw strength from. For example, I like to point out that Jesus' longest conversation, and I'm not talking about his teaching moment in John during the Last Supper, but his longest conversation in Scripture is with a woman. It's the Samaritan woman at the well. And you can kind of tell from other people's reactions that they're sort of surprised that he's, what is he doing talking with this woman? But at the end of the day, that is the longest conversation he has with an individual. And it's very interesting that that would be with a woman. Women play really interesting roles in sort of driving his ministry forward. On the one hand, they are seen as kind of the underwriters. They're the ones that bring the money into the situation. And their financial support for him is very, very important. On the other hand, you have this very interesting moment when he encounters, in Mark, she's described as the Syrophoenician woman, and Matthew as the Canaanite woman. She is the only person to beat him in an argument. There's no other character in the New Testament that actually wins in an argument against Jesus. She does. But there's something about the interaction that he has with her that really causes him to rethink just who his ministry is supposed to be for and about. Sort of after that interaction with her, that's when he begins to sort of reach out in a different way to Gentiles, to the Gentile population. And then I think, one of the things that over time, male theologians have spilled a lot of ink over to try and explain away just the fact that the women are the ones that have the first resurrection experiences of Jesus. So I bring these things up, I'm kind of being very listy here, but I guess my major point in terms of myself, how I handle this tradition, how I let this tradition sort of inform my feminism, is I think you have to start with an acknowledgement of the issues. But then I think you need to read Scripture in such a way that you begin to tease out these very interesting moments. They're not going to be obvious. The conversation with the Samaritan woman, it's not like it says, it's not like the narrator says, hey, this is the longest conversation he has with anyone. I'll bet that's significant. That's never going to happen. That's going to happen in a context where the people that are seen to be the most important to him are all going to be men. And nevertheless, that's a reality of the Scriptures. All these different sort of points of. So I sort of mention those things as a kind of a way of reading Scripture that I think is very important, and that is to sort of go in there and to sort of investigate it, maybe to look at things that are where there's implications as opposed to maybe things that are spelled out. The other thing I talk about in my tradition, the Protestant tradition, and this is sort of more Christianity in general, is I remind people that we all have a role to play in making women feel supported within this tradition. I think a lot of my fellow professional women don't really realize that for a woman pastor, 90% of the jobs out there she can't apply for. That's just a reality. And that's actually probably a generous estimate. Because when you look at, for example, the biggest denominations in the United States, the Roman Catholics, the Southern Baptists, and then you think about all the non-denominational churches, and then you think about the fact that the biggest churches in our country, virtually none of them are led by women. You begin to see that one of the ways that Christians support women is to try and gravitate, to the degree that you're able, towards churches that actually that have women in leadership roles. Because I think we all have a responsibility to support and support women who are, who are pastors, but also sort of recognize that we're still living in a time when there's significant issues within this particular brand of religion, if you will. So those are just kind of my reflections.
Thank you very much. Kate?
Yes. Am I on there? Good. Well, I'm really delighted to join you today, and thank you for inviting me, Will. I look forward to hearing from everybody about their experience with this most crucial issue of our time. I'd like to start out just giving you a little sense of who I am and how my own upbringing shaped my notions and actions regarding equality, especially about gender. The seeds of my experience with equality were sown, I think, as with most of us, in my family of origin. My mother was an early career pioneer who escaped a life of poverty in a small town where her father was a minister. She trained as an operating room nurse and then became one of the first stewardesses in the 1930s, when commercial aviation was in its infancy. She left it all to marry my father, which they all did, who was from a semi-prominent Virginia family and became a successful aviation attorney in Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised. They were a social and popular couple and wonderful providers who gave me lots of opportunities. But theirs was a typical 1950s marriage, where the man was definitely dominant and the woman was subservient. My mother felt she was inferior, partly because of her lack of a college education, and she was not happy. So the imprint of inequality was deeply imprinted in me, that nagging sense that women really weren't the equals of or as good as men. And one of the things that amazed me is when my mother was dying, I started to look through her old scrapbooks of when she was a stewardess, and I discovered, let me back up for a minute, I thought that most of the talents and whatever interest in work in the world all came from my father's family, because they were the smart ones and the successful ones. And I discovered my mother was a lecturer. When she was a stewardess, United Airlines had her go all over the Midwest giving lectures, and she was very successful. I was 72 years old before I learned that. She never told me that, and my grandfather was a religious scholar. Well, I got very interested in science and religion and studied it and wrote a book about it. And, so it's like that all came from her side of the family. And I never realized that. And that's one of the things I feel most strongly about inequality, is that you don't see the whole of the person. You see some, and that person doesn't see the whole of themselves. My mother didn't see that, and that was painful, and I kind of carried that. Anyway, this experience of feeling the inequality and dissension between them created in me kind of a strong desire to right the wrong and to bring harmony where there's dissension, to balance what's unequal. And also, I might add, a desire to take down domineering men. At the same time, as the firstborn of two girls, I was valued for my achievements and academic success in the world. I was educated in an all-girls school from 4th grade through college, which nurtured a confidence in my own mind and in the fact that women's minds were totally equal to those of men. Then I became a graduate student, a somewhat unqualified graduate student, in a highly acclaimed, very male-dominated science department at UC Berkeley. I experienced the full force of the enormous power imbalances that prevail in that kind of an environment. But then, I was very lucky to secure employment as an instructor in a brand new forward-thinking college, founded in the early 1970s with a staff that was half women and an ethnic diversity that matched that of the Bay Area. I was one of the founding mothers, as we called ourselves. Principles of gender and ethnic equality were embedded in the entire curriculum. There was a requirement that the perspective of women and ethnic groups be included in the subject matter of each general education course, including my astronomy class. So I believe that just being a part of this great experiment helped me to value much more deeply the perspectives and accomplishments of women and minorities, and to pass along that new understanding to students. It was truly heartwarming to watch a female Hispanic student take great pride in her presentation about the truly impressive accomplishments of Mayan astronomers. Another example of how I tried to bring this into astronomy was using gender examples in teaching about the scientific method and the difference between just finding correlations between things and asserting a cause. The media makes all kinds of mistakes this way. You know, you read articles in the newspaper. Coffee causes heart attacks. Well, somebody's done a study that shows there's a correlation between coffee drinking and the incidence of heart attacks. It doesn't find that the coffee causes them. That could be all kinds of other factors. So I would give them two sentences that were paired. I would say, on a recent math test, women scored an average of 10 points lower than men. That's a correlation. And then, women are not as smart as men in math. And so they had to discover which was the theory statement that somebody had just come up with versus the correlation. This led to a good discussion about the whole nature versus nurture debate and the fact that women, before they hit puberty, girls are equally good at math as boys. And then they hit puberty and their skills diverge. Well, why is that? You know, is that the hormones that change their brains? Or is it the hormones that give them a sense that it's not good to be, you won't be popular for a girl who's good at math and succeeds at math? So we had good discussions about that. And we also got into the dangers of slapping snap judgments on people based on a surface characteristic of them. That's what I did with my mother. But perhaps the most important way I think we all enable equality is simply by being who we are. I thought of you especially when you were speaking, Johanna, that being a woman in your role, that probably says more than almost anything. But as a career woman blessed with many opportunities to succeed, I came to realize that fact alone had an effect on students. My goddaughter, who took one of my classes and now works as a scientist at Lawrence Livermore Lab, told me that I was the reason that she felt she could go into science and still be who she was. I was totally dumbfounded because she and I had never had a conversation about this. So it was just, her looking at me and coming up with that. So my yearning for harmony and unity found a natural home in the teachings of Meher Baba, whom I learned about in 1968. High on a mountaintop. He's an Indian spiritual figure, and the faith tradition he founded, Sufism Reoriented, of which I became a member. In our faith, there is a very deep valuing of women as full equal partners to men. When Meher Baba began his mission in the West, women carried out leadership roles in spreading his message and in establishing and maintaining new centers and the new spiritual order of Sufism Reoriented. He asserted that in the coming age, America was destined to lead the world spiritually, and that spiritual leaders would be women. In Sufism Reoriented, our first spiritual guide, or Murshida, was a woman, as is our third teacher, Murshida Carol Weiland Connor. The notion of equality arises in another of our fundamental beliefs, that all beings are one, and we are all traveling a path leading to the full experience of that truth. One cannot feel a unity with others without truly being their equal. But it's more than just being equal. In our service projects, we strive to move beyond the notion of charity or do-gooding towards the less fortunate, and operate from the understanding that others are truly part of us. and deserve what we have. There's a story about a spiritual master in India who was asked by a follower, given all that you have told us, how should we behave toward others? And he smiled and said back, there are no others. The notion of equality is embedded in the architecture of our new sanctuary, whose form is based on the circle. All points on a circle are equidistant from the center, just as all beings are equal before God. Another perspective on gender equality arises in our understanding that the real journey through life transpires over a much longer time than one lifetime. In millions of lifetimes as a human being, we are born into one gender or another, and sometimes in between, many, many, many times, with the ultimate purpose of learning all there is to learn about being male or female. We are meant to experience and carry within ourselves all the opposites and complements of life, good and bad, rich and poor, strong and weak, as well as male and female. Finally, at the end of this grand arc of learning, we complete the circle and have a fully developed consciousness as both a male and a female. We transcend the boundaries of narrow limitations of the self. In our new sanctuary, we have a statue. We call it the new man, or the new human, or the divine being, which is represented as being androgynous, to symbolize the unity of a fully developed consciousness, of a being who has become whole. So my faith tradition feels right at home with the theme of this discussion. And we might say an equal world is a world of unity, and an enabled world is a world made whole. And we firmly believe that that's where we're headed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eartha.
I'm Eartha Newsong, and I'm a member of the Orinda Community Church now, but I'm going to give a kind of a interesting way in which I arrived there. So my history is that I decided to become a Roman Catholic when I was in my 20s, perhaps your age, and I also became a nurse and a nurse midwife. And I was very idealistic. I wanted to do all kinds of great things for the world. And I joined a Franciscan missionary order, became a nun. And I would like to just say that at this point, many people have an image of a nun, you know, in a convent. Our life was anything but that. We ran a hospital in the Punjab in Pakistan. And it happens that Bushra and I have a connection that way because she is born in Pakistan. Not where I was, but not too far. And so I was sent there, and I spent 10.5 years there with a very thrilling career in nurse midwifery. I ran a maternal and child health clinic and went out and did home deliveries, and I was working with the poorest people, most of whom were either themselves or descended from the people who had to emigrate into Pakistan from India at the time of the partition. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Gandhi's, the movie Gandhi shows it pretty well, that India was divided up in 1947, and there were Pakistan on two sides of India. There's now no longer East Pakistan, just West Pakistan. I was in West Pakistan, but I lived there during those two wars, not the partition. I was there many years after the partition. But I was there for two wars with India, and they were fought over Kashmir. I'm deviating. I'm going to try to get back to the women's issues. So one interesting thing you would probably like to know is that we ran our hospital. And that was an experience for me as an American-born woman, that women ran hospitals entirely. Business, every other aspect of it. And we nuns were not proselytizing out there at all. We were simply there to assist. There was a tremendous need, especially after the partition, for health care assistance from everywhere. And so, as I was doing my prenatal work, I was more and more, and I was wearing a nun's habit, you know. I was being asked to assist with birth control. The women all wanted help with birth control. They were having a baby about every year and a half, and they married very young. And in the beginning, I simply said, well, I'm sorry, we can't help. We'll pray for you. You can go to the civil hospital. Civil hospital in the same city existed and was providing help like that. But one day, after many years, a woman named Sugra came in, and she had already had cesareans 4 times because she had a contracted pelvis. There were reasons always why we did cesareans. We didn't do them like they do here for just about anything. But Sugra had, she was now pregnant, quite a ways along in her 5th pregnancy, and from the beginning, coming to me, to my clinic, she had been begging me for help with birth control. And I had not, because I was a nun, and the Roman Catholic Church taught that birth control was wrong. In fact, while I was out there, Humanae Vitae was published. That was the encyclical written by Pope Paul VI. After big consultation, I want you to know, he consulted with lay people, with doctors, with scientists, with everybody else about the pill. Should we allow the pill or not? And he ignored their decisions. I have a book at home I could share with anybody who'd like to read it about all the details of what went on during that period. Are these people wanting to come
I
in?
don't think so.
Okay, I should. So anyhow, but that encyclical, Humanae Vitae, totally forbade artificial birth control, which the pill was considered to be. So I was in a hard place because I was the nurse midwife for these women, and I felt that I really owed it to them. But when Sugra walked in, I snapped. I said, Sugra, I'm going to help you. She wanted her tubes tied. And the easiest time to do that is with a cesarean section. Should have been done before. She had asked for it. Okay. So I took her myself to the civil hospital and made sure that it was done and that she got, had her baby and had her tubal ligation. The nuns, my order, they were very, you know, they kind of just didn't, you know, we support you, you know. But think of it. I mean, I believe you're Catholic, right? And those of us who have any relationship with the Catholic Church understand that if you go against a church teaching and you're wearing a nun's habit, that just doesn't work. You can't do that. So I ran into a stone wall, and like many, many women before me had run into stone walls. It created a great life crisis for me. I returned to the United States because we were allowed a home leave, but during that time I realized there was no way that I could return, and that meant leaving behind all my life out there. It was a very, very painful life crisis for me. So after quite some years of reverse culture shock, dealing with family issues, my mother needed a lot of help, but at a great loss for this and trying to sort it all out. I didn't blame everyone in the Catholic Church, nor all the clergy. there had been clergy out there who were quite supportive. And I knew over here, there were plenty. I mean, 99% of American Catholic women use birth control. They don't pay any attention to humane vitae. But I, as a nun in a habit out there, could not teach it. Okay. So gradually, my own mind opened. I had many experiences of learning, opening my heart and my mind and my soul to newer theologies, things that you spoke about, for example. And by the way, I have a darling little book called Jesus According to a Woman. And if anybody would like to borrow it, I've got my name and phone number on there, and you're welcome. Oh dear, gotta go quickly here. Okay, so eventually things led me to the Orinda Community Church. I was active with them on issues of women's winter nights shelter. I don't know how many of you know about winter nights shelter, the Interfaith program. I was very actively involved with the church then. And the first woman was ordained in that congregation, not that church, but that congregation, in 1853. A little different from the Roman Catholic Church, which will not allow it. And since I've reached that, I will now tell you about a wonderful movie that was produced by a secular woman. I forget what her name is, it's all here. And it's called Pink Smoke Over the Vatican. And it's all about the women who are being ordained in the Roman Catholic community. They are considered, of course, excommunicated, but they've been ordained by official Roman Catholic bishops who are against this whole nonsense of no women to be ordained. So if anybody'd like to borrow that, and I had suggested, okay, I think I better quit.
Thank you, Eartha.
I'm Bushra Gill.
Let's just pass the microphone down.
Sorry. That's okay. I am a Muslim. I was born Muslim. I was born in Pakistan. I think Eartha spent more time in Pakistan than I did. So I left when I was 5. You went 10 years there, yeah.
5
Yeah. I was just a little bit of personal background. I, as an immigrant, I came to, when I was 5, my family moved to Texas. And for years we wondered, why did we come? Like, what made my father get up and move? Because there was nothing on the outset. He's not a petroleum engineer, which is why a lot of Pakistanis were coming to Texas. My uncle was, and so it was one of the reasons we wound up in Texas. We lived there with him. My father was a banker, but the telling thing came when we talked about it was, within my family, was that I'm from a family of 3 daughters. And my father is from a village very close to Faisalabad, where Eartha was, deep in the Punjab. And he's amongst the youngest of 12, so he's the 10th of 12 children. And his mother was the 3rd wife. His father's previous 2 wives had died early, and he was the 3rd, so he had a huge family, but by the time my dad showed up, he wasn't as important. It wasn't, there was lots of other kids around, and so there was lots of other kids who had gotten married, and they had their own children, and they collected property, and so his life was not as important. So he'd actually left them and moved down to Karachi, which is the city on the Indian Ocean, an important large city, and he went into banking. But he had these 3 daughters, and he had all this very rural family with lots of ties in Punjab. And he looked around and he realized that his daughters were going to be at some major disadvantage with these family members, that he was probably going to be not forced, but strongly encouraged to marry his daughters off, that the properties that he had, his inheritances, whatever, would be watered down because of the inheritance laws for women, Islam was one of the first religions that had
inheritance laws for women, but it's less than that of men. And so he had his brothers who are lawyers, and he was kind of worried about all of that. So he picked his family up and moved us to Texas. And because now we were here, and we're 3 girls, and education was a huge priority for him, and also telling for my mother. My mother was also a lecturer at a university. Is that yours? Yeah? Yeah, my mom was a lecturer at a university in Pakistan before she got married. She left the job when she got married, but she's always loved teaching, and it's taken her years to get back to teaching, and she teaches something different now, but education was valued very highly, and we 3 were raised to believe that we could do anything. We could work our way into anything. So, talk about the American dream. It's like the fulfilling that idea of that you can be whoever you want to be, you can study whatever you want, you can become a success. It's just about how hard you work. In a very conservative home, we grew up practicing our religion, but not to we weren't dogmatic. I didn't cover as a child. I didn't cover as an adult. Actually, I only started covering about 10 years ago. It was never forced upon us, but we were told we had to pray. That we all learned how to read the Arabic so we could read the Quran. And we went to religious classes weekly and whatever. But nothing was dogmatic. It was more about, if anything, our religion was get good grades, study hard. And interestingly enough, my older sister always wanted to be a doctor, so she became a doctor. My younger sister was interested in science, she became an engineer. I went to art school. And that was accepted, and that was encouraged, and it was, I don't think it was ideal for them, but I was allowed to do it. So when I was thinking about this idea of equality and women and faith, nothing in my faith ever said that a woman couldn't do anything that she wanted to do, that she couldn't study what she wanted, that she couldn't become anything except leading the prayer. It's the only thing that my faith says you can't do. As a woman, you can't lead the prayer. I'm fine with that. But my prayer is just as valuable as a man's prayer. The thing that I always appreciated about my faith was that we don't have an intercessor. Like every Muslim has a direct connection to their maker. And I don't need to go to someone else. I don't need to pray to a saint I don't need to, have a priest or a reverend that I need to go through, that is direct. There are leaders, of course, and scholars, and if we are to study, we're encouraged to study with the scholars so that somebody who's spent much more time learning will be able to guide the way that you direct your knowledge. But there's nothing that says that you can't do this, that, or the other thing, and that your prayer isn't valid if you do it directly, that the supplications that you make are just as important as anyone else's. And there was in a couple of stories that from within the faith that I always really loved, where in Islam we believe that it wasn't Eve that was tempted. In the Quran, actually, it says that it was Adam who was approached, and that he was the one who ate from the tree that was forbidden, and that he goes to his Lord and asks for him, and is immediately full of regret, and goes to his Lord and asks for words of forgiveness, that he didn't even know the words, but his Lord had taught him the words, and when he was asked to be taught the words of forgiveness, that's when he and his wife were sent from the garden to down to earth. I think I'm just gonna kind of leave. The only other thing I'll say is that, and then much further on, the whole thing about the scholars and the teachers and the who do we learn from. The majority of the people that we hear from are always the male scholars, and yet the majority of the stories of how Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, lived come from his wife Aisha's narrations, what he did on a daily basis. We know more about what he did and how he lived and how he practiced the faith because she was the one who shared all of that, and and in our tradition, the two, it's you follow both what's in the Quran and the Sunnah being what the Prophet did, and we know a lot about what he did because all the his home life was recorded so carefully. And somebody at one point started to compile a list of female teachers, and it was, or scholars in Islam, and they had to stop at 8,000 only because they didn't have more room, like they had to finish the book at some point, so they'd stop at 8,000. So I mean, as far as like the idea of equality, there is, it's, I personally believe, I don't think it's necessarily possible. Men and women are built the same way. Are not built the same way, and so we're not gonna be able to do the same things, and yet mentally and spiritually, I think my faith tradition says that we are equal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ojidewe Kangu Dadish, Courtney Cummings. I am Northern Cheyenne of Eartha Creek. I bring you greetings from my ancestors of my Arikara people. That is how we're taught to address when we come out to introduce ourselves, is to give acknowledgement to our ancestors who have, were here to pave the way so that many of my community could be here. When it comes to equality, women and faith, there's definitely differences between how we as the Native American community believe as far as like organized religion, the Bible, many other books that are standard that are like a guidance for people within that faith to believe. Our story of creation does not involve human beings. It involves the animals, the insects, the stars. We're many tribes, many nations across this land, so our tribes all have different stories of creation. For example, like the Lakota people, their people originated from Mount Paha in South Dakota. So it wasn't like, where you can relate it to Adam and Eve. It was more of like the people were already here within Mother Earth, who we term Mother Earth, which would be the world, and came out of the mountain and then existed within this Earth, what we call Earth. Other stories are of like, we believe that, and myself I believe too, that Mother Earth is carried by a turtle, on the back of a turtle. So, everything's connected within our belief system, where the water, the sea life, the insects, the trees are all living beings. And we honor each of those. And so like our medicine is not like pharmaceutical medicine. When we term it medicine, it's items that I brought for display today. It's like tobacco, sage, and and of course like an abalone shell. And we believe that when we pray and we burn the sage or the cedar, that the spirit eagle is the closest to Creator, and his wings see our prayers in the smoke and then takes our prayers with the wind underneath his eagle wings and lifts them up, to Creator. So eagle is amongst us here on earth, and he's the closest to how human beings are and Creator. He can see both because he still has to, feed himself like with fish and stuff like that. So he understands many of the traits and the struggles that we go through as human beings. I was kind of when you spoke about Ruth, one of the biblical figures. I was taught Christianity by my grandmother, but I was also taught my native ways by my other grandmother. So back during, when colonists came and when they came to the reservation and they decided to assimilate us by force, to make us better society citizens, our people were, forced to go into boarding schools and learn like Catholic religion. And if they learned, the children, if they still spoke amongst their native tongue to each other, the nuns and the priests would hit them physically with rulers within a class. And my grandmother, which was my mom's mom, was one of those individuals. They were taken by force from my great-grandparents by the military, United States Army Police, which was done to many of our people. So when it came to how I was decided to, if I could choose religion or spirituality, my mother allowed me to go to different churches. So I've been to Presbyterian, I've been to Protestant, I've been to Catholic, I've been to Seventh-day Adventist, and I honor my mom for just giving me that choice because she wasn't given that choice. And because of her, it made me more of a well-blended person, and I honor her today on Women's International Day for being who she was, despite the struggle, the oppression, the assimilation. She was still a caring, loving mother, and I understand where she was coming from. Sorry, I'm not gonna apologize for my tears, I'm so proud of my mom. Okay, but when it came to Ruth, my grandmother was very strong Christian, and even though she was part of the boarding school era and was taught not to speak her language, her hair was cut, she was taken from her mother, she wanted me to know the Bible. She wanted me to know Christianity. She wanted me to be accepted into society. And so I understand where my grandmother was coming from, because back, in the late 60s, 1970s, we weren't valued as human beings. If I showed up at school, elementary school with my long hair down, my back and the color of my skin, don't talk to me about Thanksgiving and, doing the crafts in school. That was very traumatic. And I don't celebrate that holiday because it's not the truth. I go to Alcatraz and I pray for the ancestors that, were sacrificed that day because of the kindness of their heart to feed people, as we're taught. But when it comes to equality, women and faith, our women in our Native community, we are leaders. We're the ones that are the medicine women. We're the ones that are the chiefs. We're the ones that, protect our people, guide our people. And so here in this country, it's flipped. It's the man, in the Bible, it's the intercessor you need to go through. That's a man to speak to your creator. Like you were saying, we can go directly, directly to our creator, our Tingashalam, our grandfather, our grandmother, grandfather moon, grandmother. So they're always around us. We don't need to, it's just something that was already there amongst all our cultures before, Christianity came, before all the, words in a book came. We all had this in our beings. It was already there amongst our ancestors. And I think that we've kind of, drifted away from that and depend too much on a written word by man that can be interpreted in so many different ways. So faith, faith to me is what keeps me strong. My prayers to my ancestors, acknowledging them daily, speaking my native tongue that was so, was forcibly taken away from my people. My culture that was forcibly taken away from my people in so many ways that the people who didn't understand us or could relate to us tried to genocide us as Native American people, you know, forcing, like my Arikara tribe, the United States Army gave my people contaminated blankets with chickenpox. But my grandmother and my grandfather, they persevered through that. And I'm here today with my children. So, you know, I know that faith is important to us as a people, and we respect other people's culture and faith, and we just ask the same for us. Thank you.
Oh,
Whoa.
I want to thank all of our panelists. Your stories are so powerful individually and certainly as a whole, collectively. Give great inspiration and strength to have done that for me, and I'm sure to all of us. And at this point, I'd like to open it up to all of you. If you have questions that you would like to ask that came up during the conversation, you can bring those cards to me, or I think at this point you can just ask your question.
do you have questions for each other?
Somebody has.
We have questions.
What does community mean?
What does community mean to each? I guess whoever feels compelled to answer that question. Something comes up for you? Community as it relates to women,
That's
or?
how you define it. That's what I'm interested in. How do people define community?
We're all related. Someone mentioned earlier, you know, the circle has the same dimensions scientifically for a fact. And we believe also as Native American community that we're all connected. If we hurt one, we're just hurting ourselves. But that hurt comes from something deep within us in our DNA that we need to heal from. So we can understand that if a community, we have to take care of our community. Without our community, there is no us. Just like with a family, you know, if you have your niece or your nephew, your grandchildren, you want to protect them and make sure that they're stay on the good way, you know, in a good way. And community is just uplifting each other and keeping each other strong and supported. Hope that answered your question for me.
Anyone else would like to respond to that?
No, I think she said it so well that we are all together in community.
So I have specific questions, not to single anybody out, but just thoughts that came to mind. And Bushra, I'm just curious, I know you're so involved in interfaith women's circles and other interfaith activities. And I have the strength to ask this question because I'm in an interfaith women's circle with Muslim women. And I often expect that it's misinterpreted, the wearing of hijab, as being somehow a subservient message or something, or symbol. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that as a woman in this society.
You know, the funny thing about hijab is, if you go back, not even 100 years, all the depictions of Christian women, Jewish women, all the depictions of women, their heads covered. And up until I think like the 1950s, all women, even in the United States, wore a hat when they went out. For us, in Islam, it's called the khimar, and that's the one difference between men and women in terms of what you cover in public. And women are to cover the idea is to cover your beauty, is to be modest. And modesty is prescribed for both men and women, but for women it's specified you cover your hair and everything except your hands. And in some interpretations you cover your feet, and some, you can be barefoot, whatever. And it's just out of that, you know, it's part of the religion. Not all Muslim women cover. Like I said, I only started covering about 10 years ago. I felt like I had to wait for the inside to match the outside. I felt like the inside had to get there first. And I had considered myself a practicing Muslim my whole life, but then when my family and I moved to California about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, yeah, it's about 10 years ago, I had young children, they were 4 and 1, and we moved from living very close to my husband's family, and I never questioned that my kids were gonna grow up Muslim, because there was all this family around, and when the time came, we were gonna put them in, you know, like, some kind of religious classes on the weekend, just like I had, and, you know, they were just gonna, like, grow up the way that everybody grows up. You know, being surrounded by family and kind of figuring out who they were, and, you know, with some guidance. But when we came out here and we don't have any family out here, that was suddenly, for me, it was like, if I want my kids to practice their faith, I'm gonna have to teach them how to do that. And that was when I started to learn a little bit more, and then had to kind of take that on a little bit. And then once I did and waited for things to catch up, then I put the covering on. Do I consider it a subservience? My husband was actually against it. He felt like it was more of like not an attraction, but like it made me stand out more rather than make me blend in. Which, you know, to some extent is true. But for me, it's a reminder that it's like a daily reminder, a constant reminder that, you know, that I have, that the being that I answer to is not anyone here on earth. That I do this for my maker, and I have to fulfill that. So if people look at me because I'm wearing a scarf, then, you know, I just have to like remember why am I wearing the scarf and what is it for?
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. The Orthodox Jewish tradition, women wear wigs or head coverings. But yes, it's true for other traditions. Yes.
I guess I'm just wondering, I would love to get your, from any and all of you, just words of wisdom. I just, myself, feel I'm in a constant state of agitation, living in the age of Trump. You've got the age of Trump, and I'm Catholic, so you've got, you know, what's happening in the Catholic Church, and then you've got coronavirus, and you've got, like, just in the world, there's so much, so many things, like, pulling people apart, and there's so much division, and really, I just think a lot of hostility. I'm just wondering, you know, and just in all women across the world, around the world in general, it's, you know, we're making strides, we've got the Me Too movement, but still, it's just, like, for me, it's just not enough, it's not happening. I don't feel it, and I'm raising a daughter here, and it's problematic, you know, and she gets mad at me because I tell, you know, when she speaks her truth, I'm like, well, you've got to rephrase it, kind of, and then she gets even more mad, you know, it's like, so I don't know, it's like, words of wisdom about what to do, what else to do moving forward, maybe, how to address the misogyny in the United States of America and the world, the violence against women in general. There's just so much, you know, maybe just, again, from your faith perspective or any of your words.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's, I think one of the reasons why, I just think that struggle is a part of life. You know what I mean? I just take it for granted. And I think, you know, I think with a lot of things, you have to just you have to kind of put yourself out there, and you have to really examine things, and you have to question things, and that's just how it goes, you know. I think that, you know, people at times look at Christianity as this really problematic faith. I mean, I think that's something that people do. But I think it's the kind of thing where you have to dig. You just have to dig into it. I mean, even with Roman Catholicism, I mean, there's all kinds of problems, for sure, when it comes to women. But then there's all kinds of people, women who are like running hospitals, and there are people who are doing amazing things too. and you have to kind of own it for yourself. I guess that's the best way that I would put it, is that you have to understand it, you have to understand its weaknesses, then at some point you have to make a decision and you have to own it for yourself. And you have to, like, when I remember when I was in seminary, we used to talk all the time about, it's like, why would you throw the baby out with the bathwater? It's like, this is a huge source of strength for so many people for millennia. And you're just gonna say, well, I'm not gonna be rooted in it because it's not perfect. Then you're getting rid of this major source of strength. You've got to struggle for it. You've got to own, like I said, you've got to own it for yourself. And I really think that that's the key thing, you know. I think almost all of these traditions pose challenges to women. I just think they do, you know. But don't let people kick you out of it. You know what I mean? Don't let people kick you out, you know. So,
Thank you. Just before you ask Randy, is there anyone else who would like to respond to that?
Mayor Bob said that at the present time, we're going through a huge period, an agonizing process of spiritual rebirth, that the world is. And that it's kind of like, I'll give a kind of low-level analogy. You know, when you clean out under your sink, and you get it all out, and you look at the filth, it's way worse for a while. You know, until the cleansing finally happens and it gets put into a new order. And I feel that it's definitely happening, but it's happening in different paces in different places, you know, and that there are some enormous strides in some places. There's some people like us who believe that it's the ordained future and we try to live that way right now. There's other people who don't think we'll ever get there. You know, it's just part of the transformation that's going on brings a certain amount of, I don't want to go as strong as saying chaos, but struggle is probably, and uncertainty. And, you know, I think if you read the news, that's a very kind of slanted view of things because they want to publish what's sensational and negative. So it's really hard to get a full grasp of exactly what is happening. You know, where does your information come from? But anyway, that's our belief, and that Mayor Baba said there were forces that were chiefly silent that had been, and he wrote this many decades ago, that were working kind of behind the scenes, you know, to guide this process that most of us don't see. I certainly don't, but I personally believe that. So that's just.
I just want to add to that, we believe that that in the struggle, like you said, that things are a struggle, and that's one of the reasons that we're here, is to, how are you going to respond? There's two lines in the Quran, and they say, out of difficulty comes ease, and it's repeated in the next line, out of difficulty and out of difficulty comes ease. So there's struggle, but that from that struggle, there will be a resolution that comes from it, and it's all about, like, how are you going to respond?
Anyone else want to respond?
Yes. With being Native American and everything that has happened to us, we could become what the term is said, angry Indians. And instead we choose to rise above that and look at our spiritual view, which then goes back to the community question, the medicine wheel. Our medicine wheel is 4 items within yourself. It's your mental, your emotional, your spiritual, and your physical. If one is off balance, then it's gonna throw everything else off balance. If you've ever stubbed your toe or hitting the funny bone on your elbow, it's, you know, you get that, oh, and blank, 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 or maybe ow, 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 you know, but that will throw your emotional off balance. You know, if you're sick or you're coming down with a cold, that's gonna throw your mental off balance. So we always look within ourselves to keep all of those in check, to say, you know, is my spiritual in balance? Is my mental in balance? Am I so stressed that over things that really don't matter in the end of the day? Is my emotional on balance? You know, why am I crying so much? Or why am I angry so much? You know, and my spiritual, have I taken care of my spirit? You know, whatever that may be for you, that's how we keep ourselves in check. And that's how we keep the focus instead of every other chaos that's going on around us, in the news, in the world, in our own neighborhoods, in our own family and friends.
Yes. I had a question for Johanna. Since you came from a scriptural base, it's been my background. I think one of the things in all the traditions, but also in Christianity in particular, is that we need to recover a sense of the sacred and relational wisdom that's expressed through women. And not just, the scriptures are written supposedly by men and canonized by men, and the revelation and the inspiration were written down by men. I think there's some wisdom to be discerned from some of the Gnostic Gospels, and also particularly the figure of Mary Magdalene in the early forming of Christian community. And it brings us back, I think, to that relational wisdom, relational consciousness, and relational participation that women bring to faith and the tradition.
Yeah, I'm gonna confess right now to the fact that I'm not really big on identifying certain traits as being part of a gender. And part of the reason why I say that is because I'm a very intellectual and analytical person. I don't see myself as particularly maternal or relational, even though I am a pastor. I mean, I think I love people, but I don't find myself frequently in that description of being a woman, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I think that, yeah, I think that's a tough one. That's a tough one for me, that observation. I mean, I think, and this is a very Protestant thing that I'm gonna say, I think we do have what we need in the scriptures, we just need to read them differently. You know, I don't think we have to go outside of them as Christians, because I think what's so fascinating is how there are these voices keep bubbling up to the surface that just run so contrary to what are oftentimes seemingly the dominant voices.
Yes, and you said you're kind of analytical or the rational. I think, though, that one of the things that brings us into an experience of wholeness is bringing together the rational and the intuitive.
Sure.
And also the movement between faith and science, that it's both an exploration of truth and what is.
Oh, absolutely. I guess what I would say is I wouldn't label intuitive as female and
No.
relational as female. I mean, I have a tendency to just, on a personal level, push back a little bit about that
Yeah.
because I just don't find myself in that.
And I don't attribute that to gender.
Okay.
Gender is a way of experiencing life, experiencing being, experience others.
Eartha, did you want to make any contribution to the last question or this question?
I'm thinking and listening and appreciating everything that's been said and plenty of thought to take home. No, in her comment about feeling neither female nor male, almost, I think that's what you were sort of saying, is similar to what you, Kate, were saying, that we go through that. And I think I've sort of experienced that in myself, you know. I never cared about marriage and kids and stuff, particularly, not when I was an adult. I wanted to get on and do things, you know, and I guess that's more masculine in a way. But I consider myself feminine, and masculine, whatever. I do very much appreciate what Courtney has brought to this, very, very much. Very touching about what the Native people have been so abused, so overlooked, so badly treated, and that we need to listen more and more. And anytime I'm ever in the presence of anyone who is alive in their native being, I gain a lot of wisdom. I don't know, yeah.
see, I have quite a few questions, but being in the mental health field um, uh, for almost 37 years now of my adult life I've spent in mental health. And being born and raised in India, and then spending almost quarter of a century here, in the Indian concept, it's not a Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh or Christian concept. It's a concept of what Native Americans, similar to Native American concept, that cosmos has female and male energy, and we all have that within us. And some are more male exuberant energy, some of us has more female exuberant, but the core of humanity is to bring those energies together, male and female, within you. And being in the mental health field, and now for last I just went there for 3 months to Stockton Prison to work with prisoners, and more, I'm there for 1 year now, and I really see the lack of mothering these folks are suffering from. And it started in the 70s. More and more I listen to them. Most of the kids, those who are in the prison here, they are from Modesto, Stockton, Fresno, that belt, Sacramento. And they have been there, some are there for 40 years, for 50 years. They came for 5 years to prison, but they started retaliating, or their mental health symptoms keep on, throwing them out of line. So they keep adding those years to their prison term. And more I listen to them, and more I see, even looking at my life and how I grew up, that how important role our mothers played in our lives. And when I listen to most of the female colleagues I have in the prison, when they talk about their children in the prison, they talk about how bad they feel when they leave them at home, because most of them are young mothers. And then I look at the prison population, but I see in them that how they got scarred because nobody was there to protect them. And sometimes their own family members, physically, sexually, neighborhood, they abused them because nobody was there to supervise or to be with them. So from that point of view, I think the role of a mother or the role of a woman, I think the more focus is, that's my perception, and I may be wrong, that more duality we create between male and female, more problem we're going to create for ourselves, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, and I have seen it over and over and over again. And the what is happening right now in the world, and we see in our election what is happening now, that we're not paying attention to those real sustainable issues. We're just, intellectualization is only one side of, as you said, of our being in this world. And the other three aspects we're not incorporating or not joining them. So I would like to hear all of your view or feedback. How can we create a world where our children are being loved and cared for, and then we don't have to have more prison in the world? Mm-hmm.
Thank
Can
you
we move
for
the
your
microphone down,
comment.
please?
Yes.
And thank you for bringing up the population of our incarcerated people, because they're still human beings too, that need prayer. Like you mentioned, a lot of I'm not gonna say a lot, but some of the population behind bars have not expressed that outwardly, did not have that mothering figure within their lives growing up. I attribute that to, like, for Native American population, when we went into boarding schools, like our grandparents, our great-grandparents, we're taught not to cry, not to hug, not to kiss, you know, on the cheek or anything like that, not to show express any type of physical emotion. So myself growing up, that also, you know, like with my grandmother, the same with me. If I would cry, she would say, you know, don't show your tears, that's a sign of weakness. You don't want to show that to society. So for many years, it took me a while before that rock around my heart was like, you know, I'm going to cry, I'm going to let it out. And I was taught by my Native American ways that when the tear falls from your eyes, it goes to your heart and it heals your heart wounds. So, you know, I cry a lot and I'm like, wow, my heart must be wounded really bad. So, but I accept it. Because I'm not only crying for myself, I'm crying for my ancestors' blood that run through me, that their wounds are being healed within my time here on this earth. So you can look back at the culture of your population and see what, you know, where'd they come from, why is that? And it's just breaking that bondage ties of it's okay to cry, it's okay to, you know, hug without being sexual in nature, it's okay to give a kiss on the cheek without it being sexual in nature, you know, because like you mentioned, there's a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of sexual trauma that happened to our people in incarceration. Until we begin to heal the past, we need to continue just praying and being supportive, praying whatever denomination or faith, what your strength is, because I believe prayers of all, you know, backgrounds help our community. And the duality, like right now society terms it LGBTQ. As Native American, we have always termed it two-spirit. Our medicine people, they were honored and reverend because they had the duality of the man and the woman's spirit within themselves. They were born that way. And if you had a two-spirit person, whether it was a male born with the female spirit and a male spirit, or a female born with the male and a female spirit, you were, in society's term, blessed, because you were given a gift from Creator to have that individual within your tribe, within your, you know, community, and that was your shaman, that was your medicine person. And that's how we view it today still, and we're teaching our people to don't allow society to say something's wrong with you or you were not supposed to be born that way. We view you that you're loved and accepted.
Well, that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you all very much for your sharing your wisdom and your perspective and your spirits with all of us. There may still be some questions that people may have for you, but we need to wrap up right now. So I want to thank all of you for your time and energy.
And let's thank our panelists, Reverend Johanna Wagner, Kate Boisvert, Eartha Newsong, Bushra Gill, and Courtney Cummings, who leads the powwows in West County. And if you've not been to one of the powwows, you need to go to the powwows and be present with Native American people to see their spirituality and see how they create community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What is the testimony?